Welcome to Empowered by Iron, the podcast for female strength athletes by female strength athletes. We are your hosts, Dr. Kristin Lander from Fiercely Fueled Nutrition Coaching and Dr. Mary Morton, scientist and weightlifter. Together, we are Empowered by Iron. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Empowered by Iron. I think we finally have this stupid video thing worked out.
Oh my gosh, this video thing. We've been trying to give you guys video plus podcast for like 2 years.
Ever.
For a long time. We abandoned it for a while, and now we're back.
Well, I think it's because you have a full-time job. At the time, I was graduate school, so like there was literally no time for us to meet at the same place at the same time.
That's true.
But now we just have to do it.
Yeah. Now this is Mary's full-time job, so...
Yeah, I do it it's my charity work. Anyway, so we got a request on our Facebook group page, which is Women in Strength Athlete Resource. So if you're not a part of that, go join it. I've seen a lot of you ladies join, which I think is phenomenal. The more we can grow the community, I think the better and better and better everything will get, because we'll get more suggestions. Kristin and I can deep dive into this shit for you and figure everything out.
Yep.
So we got a suggestion to do an episode all about post-menopausal women in strength training.
Right. Or menopausal people, anyone like 40 and over.
40 and over, yeah. So not us young spring chickens, but us wise ladies.
Wise ladies.
Wise ladies.
That was a wise choice of words, Mary.
Thanks. I don't want you to jump across the table and punch me. I've learned. So we did, over the last couple of days, we did a deep dive, I'd say, into the research that we could find all about this. And we kind of broke it down into different segments. So we're going to do like why it happens, how it happens.
Yeah. So what we're talking about is the muscle building process or muscle loss process, strength loss, and strength building in that age 40 plus age group. Right. Is what we're talking about. Mm-hmm.
Right. So I think before we jump into this, you can just say, go join the Facebook group page and follow us on Instagram. And if you have any episode ideas, please either post there or reach out on email. You can always email us at empoweredbyiron@gmail.com. Like, this is the stuff that we love. Like, we love researching things for you all.
Yeah, this podcast is for you. It's not for us. It's for you. So if there's something that you want to hear about or know about, or there's something that like a whole group of people would like to hear about, in this case, let us know, and we will do our best to put together an episode. If it's something we feel like we can't do well, we'll tell you, and we just won't do it.
Or we'll find an expert that can.
Exactly.
Right. Exactly. Okay, so we ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Let's jump into it.
So let me throw out a term here called sarcopenia. No, we're talking about muscle here. Sarc meaning muscle and penia meaning loss of. So the medical term sarcopenia literally means, I think it's Latin, literally means muscle mass lost. And they're talking about as part of the normal aging process.
All right, let's talk about it.
Yeah. So I think it's really important to start out by saying that even researchers aren't entirely sure why this happens. It's very multifactorial. So there's a lot of things that goes into it. There's no one thing. So the things that researchers have figured out is that we have decreased activity levels with aging, nutrition changes, chronic inflammation, DNA damage, elevated oxidative stress, mitochondrial dysfunction, changes in hormone levels, and impaired gut function, which we're going to get into when we talk about eating protein, because that's part of the issue. And so initially I thought we were really going to be focusing in on the hormones, the hormone piece of it, because I thought that was a really big player. And I'm not entirely sure, because we know this happens in men too. Men do have a decline in testosterone, obviously, as they age. But I thought a lot of it was menopause. And I think that plays a role, which we're going to get into. But we know, first, let's talk about the research that we've found, because there's not a whole lot of research for you ladies out there on this. We kind of had to extrapolate.
Yeah. Because every single research study we found was not on already trained athletes. It wasn't on people who were training. It was on people who haven't either ever trained or haven't done any type of resistance training in the last 3 to 6 months. So none of us, right? Who's taking 3 to 6 months off on purpose?
Right. Yeah. So we have to we can look at all of this data and say, okay, these are the things that we know that happen with age, but how does it affect female strength athletes 40 and over? We're not entirely sure, because some of you are getting into strength training and lifting and powerlifting in your 50s and 60s, which is awesome. Yeah, I love that. But it's going to affect you. This kind of stuff is going to affect you different than someone like Mary, who started lifting in her early 20s and hopefully will continue to lift into her 70s. Things are going to be different for her. So that's where things get really dicey in the research, and it's hard to understand exactly what's going on. But we're going to do our best here. So we know there's something called anabolic resistance that occurs.
So as you guys know, there's catabolism and anabolism. Catabolism is the breakdown of proteins, in this case muscle, and then anabolism is the building. That's why people say you want to have this anabolic state, anabolic window. That's building. Yep.
So there's a decline in the ability to stimulate muscle protein synthesis. We know muscle protein synthesis is stimulated 2 ways: through activity or resistance training and ingesting protein.
Diet.
Yep. So there is this resistance to muscle protein synthesis. It's not an absence of, but it's a slight resistance to that occurs really about in the 4th decade of life. So the onset of muscle mass loss begins at about age 40. These are in untrained people, we think. We're not sure. The research wasn't super clear. But what we've found is that there's about a 0.5 to 1% a year decline or loss of muscle mass. And then once you get into your 70s, it's about 1.5% a year.
Which is a lot.
It's a lot. And more staggering is the strength loss is even higher. In women, they found at starting around age 40, strength loss begins at about 2.5 to 3% a year in women, that's significant. So the other thing that I think is really, really interesting and really scary is that strength and muscle loss from just a 2-week period of disuse may never be regained. Once, particularly the once you get into your 60s and 70s, that may never be regained. So we're talking about a hospitalization, surgery, illness. The study that I looked at showed that it was a decrease in steps by 1,000 steps a day. Was the people never recovered that strength that was lost from that. Because our muscle protein synthesis and our muscle protein breakdown, that muscle protein breakdown is outpacing muscle protein synthesis when you're not active. But again, these studies were not done on
people who
you ladies
regularly train.
Yeah.
It's essentially you're starting here, you're starting at the top, and then all you're doing is you're going down and plateauing without any windows of opportunity to increase your strength or do any type of resistance training.
Right. So the research shows very clearly that resistance training and dietary optimization, so optimizing your protein intake, can counteract or at least decelerate this degenerative process. By how much? We don't know.
Because none of these studies have been done on resistance trained females. I think we did a podcast a long time ago, and we said in there's not a whole lot of studies that have been done about this. So we start broad, right?
Yep.
And then it's on different types of people, and then the type of people that are females, and then the type of people that are female strength athletes, and then the type of people that are female strength athletes who are over a certain age. It's narrowing and narrowing and narrowing, and the research just hasn't caught up to that.
Right. I totally agree. Yeah. So I guess the biggest thing is, knowing for a fact that resistance training and optimal protein intakes, which we're going to get into, can stop this process.
Right.
You can build strength and muscle mass from 40 beyond. We know that. We see that happening. Is it as easy as someone who's in their 20s? Nope. It's definitely not. It's definitely not. But I would argue that the more base you have going into your 40s, so the stronger you are, the more muscle you have going into your 40s, the less you're going to lose, or at least your starting point so much higher.
So much higher.
Yeah. Than say, my grandma who's 90, she's almost 98.
Wow.
And she's never done any sort of strength anything in her life. Like, she's walked and she's stayed active and she's healthy, but her strength is so low.
Yeah.
And I think even if I lived to be that long, I probably, as long as I tried to continue to stay active, I probably would never get to that low point. But that's my hope.
Well, that's your hope. Yeah.
We're going to find out. Come find me in 80 years, 50 years, whatever. How old am I?
Years. Come on now.
I'm living forever, Mary.
120. Hot damn, Kristin.
Okay. So the question becomes, like, can you actually build strength and muscle from about the menopausal to post-menopausal?
So like 40 plus.
Yeah, 40 plus. Yeah. I mean, the average age for menopause is like 50, 53, 48, 48 to 53, somewhere in there. I might have that wrong.
Anyway. Well, that kind of makes sense because I know my mom's above average and she's almost like 56 and she probably won't have it till she's like 65.
She's not gone through menopause yet?
No, isn't that a bummer? I don't think my grandma went until like 60.
That's not a bummer. That's awesome.
No,
that's
she hates it. She wants everything to stop.
Oh, menopause sound. Menopause. You ladies that are going through menopause, it just doesn't sound like fun.
Bless you.
I feel for you. Okay. So there is a reduced sensitivity to anabolic stimulus in postmenopausal women. That we think provides a little bit of an alternative explanation for the accelerated loss of muscle mass, particularly in early menopause. So we know men experience these same things. Women experience them to a higher degree. My question is, though, is it because men maybe start with the men that they've studied start with a higher percentage of muscle mass? I don't know. It's a good question.
Well, and I think that that's probably the case. I think because, in our youth, women are not told to lift or shown how to lift. Men are. And so they have this, at least in the back of their mind, like, I should be doing this. And so they do kind of do it over the years. Whether how consistent they are, it doesn't matter. They're doing it. Right. And women don't necessarily do that as often just because we don't have that educational resource to do it.
Right. Well, yeah. And it was, as part of, like, my grandmother said to me, the one that I just referred to, she said to me a while ago, I wish I would have gotten into lifting like you. It looks like so much fun and you seem to really enjoy it. And I wish I would have got into that when I was younger. But women didn't do that in her era. No. She was born in 1920.
Many years ago. That would make her 98.
Women did not do that.
No. Well, and I was having a conversation with one of our male lifter friends the other day about his experience in 8th grade. The high school strength coach took him under his wing and was like, this is how you do it. This is how you get strong. And I told him, I said, man, if I had a female or any strength coach been like, you know what, let me teach you how to squat when I was younger. Yeah. I think my life would be completely different. I think I would have taken up what I took up in my 20s in my teens.
You would have realized how much you loved it.
Oh, I would have loved it. I
want to do this.
Instead, I had the opposite. I had a strength coach. There were 2 women, and I took a weight training class, and he did everything to let us not lift. He was like,
trying to let you get out of it.
Yeah, but I wanted to learn, but by the end of it, I was like, all right, I'm not accepted in this community. I won't do it. Anyway, this is a sidebar. There's no point to this. Let's move on with the research.
Well, okay.
And not try to fix society.
But we are though, aren't we? Like
we're
aren't
trying.
we trying to take over the world as female strength athletes? I think we are. Okay, so there are several studies, several observations and studies that support that estrogen does have an important positive role in regards to increasing sensitivity to training, right? So, so it reduces the exercise-induced muscle damage and improves recovery. So that is some of what we know estrogen does. So some of this accelerated muscle loss, particularly in the early menopause stages, maybe because of the decreased estrogen.
But isn't estrogen also released from your adipose tissue?
It's stored in your adipose tissue.
But
estrogen gets stored in your adipose tissue, which is why sometimes people that are, I've read studies that show that people that are exceptionally lean going into menopause experience greater effects of menopause because it's a much more abrupt loss of estrogen as opposed to someone who has more adipose tissue where the estrogen is stored in, and it's not as abrupt of a loss. However, we also know that exercise and a healthy diet and the things that kind of tend to make people a little leaner is helpful in menopause with menopausal symptoms. Right. So it's one of those, it's really hard to know exactly what's at play because there's so many factors. Yeah. But we also know that postmenopausal women experience a diminished anabolic response to feeding and resistance exercise compared with young subjects and with age-matched men. That's really important. So this still happens with men. Yeah. But men of the same age, they're not as anabolically resistant as women of the same age that are postmenopausal. Right. So definitely there's some hormones at play.
But it's not just hormones. For sure.
Yeah, exactly.
It seems to be like a big, huge process.
It's stuff happening
at the network.
Yeah, it's stuff happening at the molecular level, at the cellular level. There's so much happening, and no one's entirely sure. Like, I don't think they can point their finger and say it's one thing or two things. It's a whole host of things that are occurring in the body that all point to this direction. But here's what's really cool is that I saw this study. They compared men and women strength resistance training 3 times per week over 26 weeks. And it was elderly women and elderly men. And I don't know what they classified as elderly, but I'm going to say...
It was probably 64 to 72. 60, that's what I saw.
Yeah. I was going to say 60s, 70s. And the women still put on, they had in that 26-week period, they had a 7.5% increase in muscle volume. Actually, excuse me, that was over a 10-week study.
Damn.
So it's absolutely possible to build muscle size and strength. It's just not occurring quite as fast as someone in their 20s.
Right.
Yeah. So I know everything. When I was reading this, I'm like, oh, this all sounds so doom and gloom, but it's not. It's
not.
It's harder, yes, and I think you just have to accept that, but don't dwell on it, I think is the biggest thing. Just know we're going to get into some recommendations for nutrition and training here in a second, and I think that is like focus on the things that you can do, do everything that you possibly can do, and then we can't change the things we can't change.
We can't change biology.
Right.
That's just how it's going to be.
Right.
But, keep in mind that this is why they have master's classes. This is why this exists. Because obviously it's advantageous to be a young spring chicken.
Right.
So they have these other classes. And that's not to knock the accomplishments of those classes. Holy shit, if you start when you're 40 or 50 weightlifting and you're breaking records, that's huge. That's phenomenal. You shouldn't be like, oh man, if only I started, whatever. So what? You can't go back 20 years. You started when you started. Right. Look what you've accomplished. Just look forward. Right. And I know that's hard to hear from someone who's young, but like I just said a few minutes ago, if I had started lifting in my teens, things would be very different. But I can't lament. I can't like live in the past. Be like, well, why didn't someone teach me?
Like, what can you do now?
Here I am now.
Yep.
What can we do?
Yep. I also think too, like that there is, I think that some younger lifters, like there's this idea that masters powerlifting and masters weightlifting, like doesn't matter or isn't as important.
Yeah. Fuck those guys. Okay. It's not
And it's
true.
like, actually, I mean, all of you junior and senior lifters,
you all the special
awesome.
butterflies.
You're all awesome. And the people that are competing at the top level and that I'm not taking away anything from your accomplishments because it is awesome. Super
Semicolon,
awesome.
however, comma.
However, people like I've been to masters weightlifting meets and seen 70, 80-year-old lifters. And like, that is incredible. That is
goals.
So incredible to me. Absolutely.
If
I don't know if I would, I'm not even sure I'll be able to perform a snatch in 10 years, let alone 30 years. Like, and
Right.
I mean, the mobility changes that occur.
Exactly. So yeah, it's not, you are not less because
you're a master.
You are a master's lifter.
Yeah.
That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard.
Right. So I want to talk just really briefly because we were talking about hormones. I want to talk about, and so it's hard to know exactly the effects of what hormone has on skeletal muscle because in the research, they talk about this, like there's individual variance in hormone levels. There's changes in hormone levels throughout menstrual cycles.
Right.
So if you do a study on 5,000 women, it's going to be very, very difficult to extrapolate the data of which hormone is having what effect.
Right.
But something really interesting I did find in the research was that the administration of progesterone was associated with a 50% increase in muscle protein synthesis rates in postmenopausal women, whereas estrogen replacement therapy didn't actually affect muscle protein synthesis.
Which kind of makes sense. Progesterone is an antagonist or it binds estrogen, right?
Right.
And estrogen can inhibit muscle protein synthesis.
Right, it can. But we know estrogen is also very important for our tendons and ligaments.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
So, but I thought that was really interesting. A 50% increase in muscle protein synthesis with progesterone. So that this suggests basically that estrogen might not have any like marked effect on muscle protein synthesis rates, but it does reduce muscle protein breakdown. And
which is huge.
Yeah. And it enhances the sensitivity to anabolic stimuli, which is protein ingestion and training. So it's one of those, like if you're in the category of people that qualifies for hormone replacement therapy of estrogen or progesterone, and you feel like that's something you want to talk to your doctor about, go for it. There's no shame in that. That's definitely a conversation I think to have with your doctor. I'm not the person to have that conversation with you because there are obviously risks that can be associated with it. But sometimes the benefits outweigh the risks, and that's something that you have to decide for yourself and with your doctor.
Well, and just, double check the federation that you lift in. From our research, from our little skimpy dive into it, they don't seem to outlaw progesterone or estrogen.
Well, if they did, then no one could take birth control pills.
Well, exactly. So,
but testosterone is sometimes included in hormone replacement therapy for women.
Yeah.
So that is something that is not allowed. You cannot get a therapeutic use exemption. You would have to compete in a federation that is not tested and allows that.
Right. So then you might as well just go full balls to the wall.
Injecting
Give it all.
Yeah. You're not condoning that.
No, but we are saying talk to your doctor and do some research into your federation. Email the people, ask the questions. You know, the worst that they can say is yes. The worst they can say is no. Right. And then you just move on from there.
Right. Let's talk about how someone 40 plus maybe could modify their training or what kind of considerations they need for training.
All right.
You ready?
Let's get into this because the answer is we don't know. So let me kind of explain what I found. In general, what I found is that there is this consensus, although I couldn't find the study to point to this or a study to point to this, there is a consensus that you need to reduce the volume or the frequency of training, so that if you're training 6 days a week, cut it down to 5 days a week or 5 to 4. Generally, they recommend, it seemed, 4 days a week for those who were, and I looked at a lot of studies that were 50-year-olds plus.
Okay.
So that seemed to be the consensus.
So 4 days a week as opposed to 5 or 6 days a week.
Yeah, just reduce the time. And the only thing I can really think of is it just because you're having a hard time putting on muscle because of everything going on in your body. It just gives your body that much extra time to recover from any of the breakdown that may occur, or, you hurt your muscles when you train and they need to be rebuilt. So you're just giving them that extra time.
Yeah.
I remember you did 4 days a week for a while and you felt really good.
Yeah. That 4 days a week was huge for me, going to 4 days a week. And I'm at like 4.5 days
on
now.
average.
Like
it just depends.
My fifth day is different. It's Olympic lifting is my fifth day.
Right. And right now it's not like imperative that you do it. Some days, if you're feeling it, you'll do it. If not, you won't.
Yeah. If I feel like I need an extra day to recover, I don't lift that day. I don't have programming. So it's kind of my free day. If I'm feeling really good, I might go kill it, but I do have rules on that. Like I'm not allowed to max out and stuff. So right. I definitely know I see a huge difference between my 20s and my late 30s in recovery. And so I think that making sure that you're getting enough recovery is going to be really, really key. And I think that is the reason for the suggestion of 4 days a week. But a lot of the other research that was out there that talked about like volume, like low volume versus high volume.
Yeah. Yeah, let me talk about this.
Yeah, because I want to talk to these researchers.
We're moving into the next part of this. So the first part was the general consideration was to reduce frequency or volume. The second thing that I looked at in all of these studies was they looked at like high volume versus low volume. So for example, one study considered a low volume training cycle. So whether this was a 12-week cycle or a 16-week cycle or even a year cycle, it was low volume was considering 1 set per exercise 2 times a week. Or high volume was 2 sets of exercise per exercise 2 times a week. Which is to me like, what?
Yeah, right. Because like to me, like 2 sets is like
warm
what?
Up.
Yeah, it's not. I don't think I've ever only done 2 sets of anything.
Right, and
I'm not 50 plus, so maybe that's why. But that seems like their high volume still seems low volume to me.
Yeah, and I think this is where it talks about like where we can really look into, hey, this isn't actually designed for strength athletes, because when you looked at who their subjects were, they were healthy women, 60 to 70 years old, without prior resistance training in the last 3 or 6 months.
Okay.
So like, these are not people that are us.
Right.
So we have to take that in consideration. But, so from the research, basically, again, it said between the high volume and low volume, there was no significant changes in hormonal changes or strength increases when they compared low volume to high volume. In my brain, I say, of course, duh, because your low volume is high volume. Like there is no difference. You're basically doing the same thing.
1 set versus 2 sets. We're not talking about 1 set versus 5 sets.
Right.
We're not talking about the difference between a 5x5 or a 6x4 and a 2x2.
Right. So there was one study, though, that was a year-long study that I thought was pretty decent. I was a little disappointed in how much they chose to study, because you're investing a year into this. Yeah. Like you should be pulling all strings, look at everything. So they looked at a 12-month resistance training program in post-menopausal women. They looked at 1 rep maxes, and then they looked at like lean body mass, body fat percentage, BMI, what have you. So they found on average the women had an increase in strength, a decrease or an increase in lean body mass, a decrease in fat mass, and and a decrease in body weight and BMI. So let's just talk about BMI briefly, because in our E for Strength group, it was brought up this week about it. And yeah, Kristin, please take it away.
What did I have to say about it? I said BMI can go suck it.
Basically.
Because BMI, if you have any sort of muscle mass, BMI is just a terrible measurement.
Yeah.
I think that this is generally well known in the strength industry, but if you don't know that and your doctor tells you that you're obese or overweight based on your BMI, just ignore that. Ignore that. That is not true. I think a much healthier measurement is body fat percentage. Because we know that having body fat for women, like in the 25 to 30% range, is still healthy, but above that, we're looking at like chronic inflammation and making you a lot more susceptible to a lot of diseases.
Yeah. So it's a health consideration. Right. But if you look at someone who's my height, 5'6" 3/4", I'm not 5'7" anymore. Anyway, so if you look at that and you look at my weight and you look at my muscle, I've had doctors say, oh, you might want to watch your weight, which is absurd to me. Right. Because it just doesn't account for your muscle.
You're very healthy. Absolutely. My BMI has me at right on the border of overweight and obese.
Nice.
Which I'm not.
No. And so, and I think we'll get into this in a future episode, but for someone who has some type of disordered eating, like that is devastating to hear. That all of a sudden you're now considered unhealthy or obese and you've been trying to work on your body. Anyway, so if your doctor says that BMI, you're unhealthy, you need to lose 10 pounds, no, stand up to your doctor and say, do your research, read articles like a doctor is supposed to, and recognize that BMI does not describe female strength athletes, much like most of this research doesn't.
Right, exactly.
But we're going to get back into it. Okay, so after that side note, let's talk a little bit about this 1-year study and its impact on leptin and resistance. So your inflammation and your insulin pathway. Yep. So they found that there was a decrease in leptin and resistin, that's the protein, levels over the 12 months. Leptin and resistin play real pivotal roles in inflammatory processes and insulin resistance. Yeah. And I'm quoting this from the article exactly. It is possible that decreases in fat mass leads to decreases in leptin and resistin concentrations. Which is good. That's what we want. That's what we want. So with decreases in your leptin, that plays into your inflammation processes in your body. And with higher levels of leptin, you have higher inflammation. Right. And we want to keep that low as we get older. Right. And this is where we go into the adipose tissue, secreting pro-inflammatory cytokines, right? Exactly. So cytokines are things that your immune system secretes that causes your cells to act in certain ways, usually in a pro-inflammatory or an anti-inflammatory manner. Exactly. Yeah. And so basically this whole thing said that resistance training is really important for these women to get into as they get older. And what was interesting is they put on about 2 kilos of muscle in the year. Yeah. So their lean body mass increased about 2 kilos. That's great. Throughout the year. So as someone who's, what was that, 64 to 72? That's huge. It's not impossible. Huge. Right. Because we talked about, so you just said that was muscle mass, right? That they put on. And we just talked about if you do nothing during that age period, you would lose about 0.5 to 1% of your muscle mass per year. Yeah. So this was over a year. They put on how much? 2 kilos. Yeah, that's awesome. That's great. So we know that you can not only stop that process, reverse some of that process. Yeah. And remember, these are in untrained. These are what we would call beginner gains. So, and think about this. If you are just getting into lifting and you are in this age bracket or maybe a little below or a little above, think about their high volume versus low volume. I told you what it was. Yeah. It's like one set. It's set versus 2 sets. This one may have been just a little bit different. I can't remember, but they were all essentially the same. where it was very low amounts of training. And think about what you're doing on top of that. So you're probably doing like a regular 4-day-a-week program with multiple exercises and many sets.
Yeah.
Think about how much more
sets.
that's going to be if you're doing that much extra and you're really taking into consideration diet, because that's the other thing they didn't do with this study is they didn't try to control diet because they weren't really interested in how different dieting affects this. Not dieting as in trying to lose weight, but different
Just what you're eating.
What you're eating. They just looked at did their diets change all that much, and they didn't. So if you're also eating with a consideration of higher protein and trying to maximize your training carbs and whatnot, just think if they could put on 2 kilos in their first year.
And didn't even focus on any of that. Yeah. What can you do?
What can you do?
And the one thing I would say that's really important then is the recovery, which we talked about.
Yeah.
I think you have a note that says you found that it takes 72 hours for that age group to have like complete recovery.
Complete muscle recovery. Obviously, we can't wait 72 hours. So that would be 3 days in between every training session. But if you give it, over 24 hours, close to 48 hours, you're in a much better spot than if you just waited that 24 hours.
Yeah. Well, and if you think about it too, that's part of training, right? Is that we're all training a little under recovered. Like we never are fully recovered. That's what a taper is. That's why you go into a meet feeling like the Incredible Hulk, because you're for the first time in months, you're fully recovered.
Right.
Yeah. Right. So let's talk about some of those nutritional considerations because
so just to sum up the training, reduce frequency and volume. So 4 days a week, I think is about good. And then whatever your coach probably has you on is probably fine because you've taken out that one extra day.
Yeah.
And then
in terms of sets, you mean?
Right. And then just make sure you're on top of your recovery, like sleep. Make sure you're sleeping, make sure you're eating, make sure you're staying on your mobility because as Kristin said, as you get older, you lose some of that mobility.
Yep. So I looked at, the biggest thing that we know happens is we talked about this anabolic resistance. So the resistance to muscle protein synthesis through ingesting protein. And so I looked at a study, it compared men and it compared 71-year-old men to 22-year-old men. And it found that the dose of protein required to stimulate maximal response, so maximal muscle protein synthesis, was 68% greater in the older group than the younger group. So that meant that the older group needed to consume 0.4 grams per kilograms of body mass per meal, whereas the younger men, the 22-year-old men, only needed 0.24 grams per kilogram. So it's almost double, not quite, the amounts that they need to stimulate maximum muscle protein synthesis. So 0.4 grams per kilogram per meal. And then they gave a daily protein intake range, which is well within the recommendations that we've always made for people.
Actually, it's pretty low on it. If you look
it is
at
low. So they say 1.2 to 1.5 grams per kilogram of body mass per day. That is significantly higher than the RDA. The RDA is 0.8, but we've said all along strength athletes need way more than that. And so our recommendations have always been around 1.5 to 2.5,
2.4,
basically
2.5
grams per kilogram a day. So they're saying 1.2 to 1.5. Make sure you're in that range. And that's likely going to help preserve muscle mass and strength.
Yeah. So for us, I mean, not just as strength athletes, both men and women, but as females, if we're eating that much protein, we should be A-okay.
Exactly. Yep. So I think this is where nutrition is going to be really important. The nutritional considerations are not that much different from a regular strength athlete, a younger strength athlete. They're very similar. So you need to be getting enough protein. I still would say that you need to do the whole carb timing like we talk about. Make sure that you're eating enough carbohydrates. Your fat levels need to be at a rate that is enough for health. So all of those things that we have been saying for years, that we've been telling you guys for years, you still need to do all of those things and just make sure that you're optimizing that protein.
Yeah.
Which if you've been following our recommendations these 2 years, you're going to be in there.
You're going to be good. Yeah. This goes back to what we've been saying. None of these studies are on female strength athletes, and hardly any of them are on athletes. And you think about the average American diet, everyone is so concerned about where they're going to get their protein, because a lot of the diet that the average American, or I mean, even Europeans and Australians, is from carbs and fats with some protein in there. And so as long as we are consistent in how much we're eating and just stay on top of it, like, you're going to be set.
Yeah, definitely. I think that this paints a picture that shows, I mean, in all of you ladies that are doing this, like, you already know, like, you are building strength, you are building muscle mass, but I think that it's just more important to make sure that you're dialing all of those things in for this period of life. You know?
Stay dialed in. What else? Is that it?
Yeah.
Man, that is not as crazy as I thought.
That is it. Yeah. So like we said,
not much has changed. But I will say the definitely look at reducing your frequency of training.
Yeah, I think that would be big.
That's huge, because the recovery thing, I mean, if you think about how overtrained a young person can get and how much it can knock them out, if you're already at a disadvantage based on age and just how your body's functioning as itself, take recovery as serious as you take your training.
I totally agree. I mean, and that's my recommendation for everyone, right? If we're trying to get better, and the different, I was just talking to one of my athletes the other day, that she competed at Powerlifting Worlds, IPF Worlds, and the difference between first place and second place was like 0.5%, 0.1%. I can't remember total. It was insane. And so why not do all of the difference between their totals, first and second place at Worlds, was so small that they are percentages of things that can be made up through dialing in your recovery, dialing in your training, dialing in your nutrition. All of that stuff can add up to literally the difference between first and second place at World Championships. And so I think that's kind of, you guys probably know, I'm just like, if I'm in it, I'm all in. Yeah. And so I either do something or don't do something. I don't tend to half-ass things. And I'm that way with my training and my performance, my recovery and my nutrition, all of that, because why would you do anything that would sell yourself a little bit short? Especially if you're already at a slight disadvantage. Yeah. So, and even if
you're just brand new, you can still get as strong as you possibly can. You just have to work, which is consistent across all age groups. You have to show up, you have to do the work.
Right. And don't be discouraged by things that you have working against you.
Yeah, no.
I think that because
they're all overcomable.
Absolutely. Well, and everyone's got things working against them, right? They've got like something in their home life or their work life or just whatever. I mean, we all have these things and everyone's journey is a little bit different. And so I think focusing on the things that we have control over and the things that we can change is super important.
It's huge. Yeah. Keep a positive attitude. I think that's it. If you haven't already, go check out our YouTube page. This one should be video, like, for real.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's crazy.
Unless something gets messed up.
Don't say that. Oh, God. Okay. Well, I'm going to go make sure nothing's messed up now. Until next week, if you like this podcast, tell a friend.
Yeah.
I think that's the best thing you guys can do for us and to grow this podcast and to grow this wealth community of female strength community. Until next time.
Bye guys.